Everybody knows that silos are bad for business, right? Well, maybe not so much if you look into the analysis of billions of emails from hundreds of companies sent by employees during the pandemic. Maybe, under the right circumstances, silos can deliver a communication advantage. That story is coming right up on For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome to episode 228 of For Immediate Release. This is Neville Hobson.
And this is Shel Holtz. And we're here today with one of our short episodes to talk about a fascinating study and some of the conclusions that came out of it. There are debates that are just raging right now as organizations contemplate the approach they're going to take to return to the workplace as the pandemic recedes, and whether it's going to be full-time remote or hybrid or insisting on everyone in the office. And one of the things that we keep hearing is that when people work remote, they participate in meetings, they participate in conversations with the people in their teams, but we lose that serendipitous conversation that happens when you bump into somebody in the coffee room or passing them in the hall. And this study, and it's a remarkable study in terms of the amount of data that was crunched, speaks directly to that with some fascinating results. The study that we're here to talk about came out of Harvard, which lends it a certain amount of credibility right there. And they studied literally hundreds of billions of emails between workers at thousands of organizations globally in 2019 and 2020. And what came out of this was an unintended side effect of people working remotely. What they found was that people did form silos, that the communication became more siloed. I don't think anybody's going to be shocked or surprised by this. This is one of the complaints that we've heard about remote work. Oh, we've lost that casual encounter that leads to new ideas. But what they found was that communication within those siloed groups intensified. It got stronger. It got better. The leaders in organizations that are trying to figure this out have to understand that the medium of communication, a shift from in-person to online, can actually change who communicates with whom. This is according to the person who was behind this study, an associate professor at Harvard Business School whose name is Tiona Zuzul. She said these changes occurred across organizations in 2020, even in areas long after work-at-home orders were lifted. I think for us as communicators, Neville, this is really important to absorb and to consider in the recommendations, the counsel that we provide to leadership, because this is a change. We don't necessarily want to recommend that we go back to doing things the way they were because it produced those serendipitous encounters. Not if communication has gotten better and stronger and more solid as a result of this siloing. You know, we use the word silo like it's a bad word. In fact, the researchers in this particular study said they considered not using it, but it's so pervasive they couldn't see how they could get away with that. But whenever I hear anybody talking about breaking down silos, I try to remind them that when you break down a silo, all the grain falls out, right? I mean, this is what a silo actually is. It's an agricultural structure for maintaining your product. But they do need to be ventilated. So maybe it's ways in the digital world that we find to produce some of that serendipitous communication while continuing to encourage this intensified communication among people who are actually getting the work done.
Yeah, it does throw up a lot of questions, and I think you're right. They do make the point, and I've been thinking about it too, that silo has a negative connotation to most people. It isn't a good thing typically when you have silos. The implication being, and indeed the practice you tend to see, is they are very exclusive. They're just the people within the silo, and they're not connected to other people openly as you might wish. And so you have lots of silos that are all separate. They're talking about something that's a benefit as a result of this by, I guess, a consequential outcome from the forced separation of physical presences in a particular place. So it is interesting, particularly one of their conclusions they mention, that serendipitous communication, this thing I keep hearing a lot of people talking about, the big missing thing with virtual and not coming into a workplace physically, is the fact that you miss these casual encounters. I would argue that you might miss those traditional encounters, but you can replace them with virtual encounters. I do that. I've been reflecting myself today, thinking about this conversation we're having, on my experiences over the last year and a half or so with people I work with in organizations where, if it hadn't been for the pandemic and all the things that have happened as a result, lockdowns and so forth, restrictions of movements, we would have been physically getting together. Well, we can't do that. Simple as that. And so what happens? Have relationships diminished? Have idea sharing and brainstorming and all the things that happen in an unstructured way diminished? I suppose I could admit, yeah, they've been affected. Things are different. Yet it has not destroyed the kind of human interactions that you would have got if it hadn't been for this. They are just different now. So I find that this works still. Having said that, I recognize that for some people, and probably many, it doesn't work. So there is that missing link. But this report, though, does throw up some benefits of silos. They go into great pains to stress this in the report, thinking about things like better cross-departmental sharing of ideas, they say, positive outcomes from remote working this way. And one clear thing, I guess anyone can imagine, it could allow like-minded people to spend less time commuting to and from work, the travel bit, and more time discussing innovative new ideas with one another virtually. Well, exactly. So it isn't the same. It's not totally negative. It's different. And we have to adjust and make the most of this new environment in which we find ourselves, because this is the new normal.
Exactly. And I think the point that it's different is an important one. We're not trying to replicate what was before. We're not going back to what was before. Clearly, most organizations are not. They're struggling to find what they're going forward to. But we have to acknowledge that even though we may have lost that cross-departmental sharing of ideas, we have gained something as well, right? They talk about the fact that these interactions that people have within their communities have intensified, and that's a good thing. In terms of the serendipitous part of this, though, I think there are ways that you can do that. I mean, good heavens, how many meetings have I been in that have been large Zoom meetings where they say, we're now going to break you into randomly selected rooms, and I suddenly find myself with 3, 4, 5 other employees of the company that I never talked to, and we get to spend 15 minutes brainstorming. I mean, that's not as serendipitous as walking to get a cup of coffee and bumping into somebody,
Different.
But at least it puts you in contact with people that you don't normally see. We have to find new ways to do this for those people who are not going to be back in the office.
Yeah, you're right. And one other thing I found interesting about this was you touched on it in your introduction at the beginning, the sheer volume of data that the researchers used. I mean, they talk about 360 billion Outlook emails sent in these organizations over 24 months of a 2-year period, 2019-2020. 4,361 organizations, 1.4 billion email accounts, and they stress that they didn't see the emails themselves. It's purely the traffic that they captured. And I think that what struck me about that was, other than the sheer volume, and this is big data, capital B, capital D, right? is this was this was serendipitous. I mean, this is people interacting with each other. It's not planned. It's not kind of a strategy the organization has set for the employees. This is what people were doing in their day-to-day interactions at work. And that's a natural thing. That is how humans interact with each other, using the tools to do all these things. It changed dramatically during this period. And I mean, it's validated by the data, the conclusions they've made. It's a really good example of data-driven research, of data that provided insights that make sense in what their conclusions are.
Yeah, data telling a story.
Data telling a story, exactly.
And
so
when you talk about the volume of data, what really struck me was that the processing and sorting of the data took 55,000 computer hours. This is just the computer crunching it. 55,000 hours to get through all of that and review.
They obviously only had one computer. so I think
it was running Windows Vista, right?
Right, exactly. If you'd upgrade to 11, it would have been quicker than that. But I think the conclusion, or one of the conclusions, that again, this is a logical step. The major lesson, they say, for employers is there's been a shift in our communication networks as a result of the pandemic, and that this shift has to shape future decisions about organizational design. And that's a really strong message, very, very concisely noted, when we know already from conversations we've had on this podcast and previous episodes that there's reports, some anecdotal, but some actual reporting on how some organizations are making decisions about the design of their organization, the future, without consulting the employees. It's like the management think, yeah, we know what people want, let's go ahead and do this, and they wonder why people don't like that.
Yeah, and of course there's research that shows that there's a gap between managers who think they know what employees want and employees who think that managers really do know.
Well, indeed. But I think this is more evidence that you can't just make those kind of assumptions and indeed decisions by yourselves. This has got to be an all-embracing process. And this just adds more useful insights into the things that employers have to do, for this is becoming the new normal for everyone.
We'll put a link to the Harvard Business School article as well as a link to the complete study in the show notes for this episode at FIRpodcastnetwork.com. And that will be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.